Hi, I'm Owen from Rask Australia. Thanks for tuning in to the Rask Network. Before we get into today's show, there are a few things we have to go over. Firstly, what you're about to hear and see is limited to general information only. It's not personal financial advice like you'd get from a financial planner. Also, it's important to remember that past performance is not indicative of future performance. That means that anything that's happened in the past, or we say today, is not necessarily going to reflect what happens in the future. Lastly, please consider that any of the guests or myself are featuring on this program may have a financial interest in some of the products or shares mentioned. That's enough from me. I hope you enjoyed today's program. One of the things I wanted to pick your brains on is this idea of modern monetary theory. And I'm not sure if that's the right term for it, but that's what we know it as, MMT. And I thought maybe, Stephen, you could introduce us to, I guess, how economics has played a role in markets over the past 20 or 30 years. Yep. But then also, I guess, give us this kind of overview of what is MMT, how has it changed, how has it not? And we'll have more questions. I'll have more questions towards the end, but what I'm trying to get to is how it informs your view, or how it should inform a private investor's view.
Yep. Modern monetary theory is look, whatever I say about it's going to be controversial because it's a controversial topic. Not beloved by many old economists. But basically, modern monetary theory says the government is a currency issuer. Now, that means that they can never run out of money. Okay? And so the corollary of that is, well, government debt's not that important, right? So you imagine if I said to you, we're living in a place called Owen Land, right? And we have Owen dollars, that's the currency, right? And everybody buys and sells in Owen dollars, right? And you're Owen. And someone says, geez, Owen's racking up a bit of debt. How's he going to pay it back? Now, you create the money. So what you would do is say, oh, how much do I owe you? $100. Right, okay, hang on. There you go, there's $100. Where'd you get that from? Oh, I just created it out the back there. That's Owen dollars, right? And that's all modern monetary theory does. Now, the controversial bit, and that's not controversial because that's what governments do. Banks do it as well when they create loans, and, it gets a bit more technical. But essentially, the argument has always been, oh, well, if the governments can create their own money, they'll spend like crazy and then they'll create inflation. And that's bad. What monetary theory says is, look, the reality is that economics is about delivering rising living standards, or, feeding people their needs, right? And their wants. And so what it says is the government should employ people and to maximize resources, okay, with real resources. Why should 10% of the people sit around being unemployed when the government can go out the back and say, listen, Owen, you're not working? Listen, mate, here's $1,000. Go and spend a bit of money. So you go and spend it. And then you come back and you say, yeah, I've spent that money. And I say, listen, Owen, here's some more. Here's another 1,000. You spend it. Suddenly the bloke says, listen, Owen, why don't you come and, work for me? Because I need someone to, deal with all this demand. That's what it basically boils down to. And so modern monetary theory, and this is, if you have a look at history, government deficits are really good for the economy because the government is saying, here's a big bunch of money, everybody. Go out and, build bridges and do things that we want to do. So again, if you look in 2009, the stock markets around the world bounced back because Obama and in Australia, Rudd spent lots of money. And when you spend lots of money, you create jobs. What a lot of people don't like is saying, oh, well, inflation will go out of control. But it hasn't really eventuated. And so the part of the reason why that happens is because these days, if you said, look, we need 1 million iPhones, China would knock it up in a week, right? Because they've got so much spare capacity. So in the old days, when there was less manufacturing capacity, you had constraints that genuinely did create inflation. But now those aren't really there. And so the government, as you can see, in the last 3 years or 4 years has been saying, you know, we've got to get a budget surplus. We've got to get the surplus. You know, we've got to get the government back to surplus. Suddenly when COVID hit, they went, actually, we've got 200 billion we can spend. Now, the question is, well, hang on, where'd you get that from? Oh, we just created it. The problem that they have for politicians is saying, people like you and me going, oh, well, if you can do that, you can do that anytime. So where's my bit? So when you look at it really, if you understand MMT, you get to a point where you start judging things by the morality or the ethics of it, which is, look, we've got plenty of resources. What should we spend it on? Who deserves to get what with the distribution of those resources, not the money. So it's been around for a while. It's controversial because in the last 40 odd years, Owen, we've been dominated by supply side economics. And what that means is government deficits were frowned upon. Okay, but it's not really true. And as we've seen in history, when governments spend a lot of money, the stock market goes through the roof because it's more new money coming in. And so if you think about, Owen land, if there's 10 of us on the Owen land, then if I'm not borrowing new money to do stuff, there's a set amount of money just circulating. And so it's a zero-sum game because if I buy off you, I haven't got any money to buy off someone else. So there's no growth. What you need is money coming in. And there's two ways to do that. The government, Owen, can say, listen, here's a bunch of more dollars, go and do some more stuff. Or what we've done for the last 30 years has set private people to go and borrow. And so hence the reason why Australia has got a very large private sector deficit, because the private sector deficit has made up for the government not spending money. So what that does is, when you look at it, it's always about, in my mind, looking at what the debt capacity is, who's borrowing, and what the government is doing, because you have to have new money or new energy coming into that system for it to expand. Otherwise, if there's 10 Owen dollars circulating in the economy, if there's no more Owen dollars coming in, those $10 is just going to shift between us, but no one's getting any wealthier. Okay, so you need the new money to come in. If I say, well, look, Owen, I really want to build a bridge, you say, okay, well, here's some new dollars, go and build a bridge. Then I go and hire people and say, look, John, I need you to, come and help me on the bridge. Here's some wages, and you get the expansion. So contrary to a lot of people's arguments, government deficits are actually good for investors. And there's one simple example, which is when Bill Clinton came in, he basically turned the government from deficit into a surplus and automatically created a recession in the US economy. And that's how it sort of operates. Bill Clinton created the recession, and Australia has recently struggled because the government is not spending enough money. And so you've got this problem where you've got low wages, and if people haven't got enough money, what do? Well, they either adjust their budget accordingly, or they what we've done in Australia in the last 20 odd years is go and borrow money to speculate on property and stocks and, all kinds of stuff. So that leads us to a position where we've got, 180 odd, 190% to GDP in debt. Whichever way you want to look at it, Australians are carrying a very large amount of debt. And what that does is makes you vulnerable to a black swan or a COVID, where you sort of go, oh, geez, I didn't see that COVID thingy. And now it's like, oh, well, now I'm out of a job, or now I haven't got cash flow for 6 months. If you haven't got debt, it's sort of like, well, that's not very good, but at least you haven't got the pressure on your investments to sell them down. And so, it's a dangerous position to be in, I think.
How about then I guess when I think about this, I think about monetary policy and interest rates coming down a long way over the past 20 to 30 years.
Yes.
And then I see people saying, well, effectively modern monetary theory is what we've been doing in the background. And then people saying, like you've said, it's effectively the government can still service the debt because if it issues debt in its own currency and it's in control of that, it can effectively do what it wants.
Yes.
What would be the case going forward then, as we probably shift towards more fiscal policy where the government sets a budget, aims to stimulate in certain ways? What would be, in your mind, I guess, the criticism of MMT in adopting more of that approach versus, I guess, this, if I could say it, the old way of economics, which is more driven by an independent body, the central bank, which controls monetary policy?
Yeah, well, we don't elect the central bank. We elect politicians. And so what I mean by that is, you can't go in and talk to Philip Lowe and argue about it and, demand he do something because he's independent. But if you go and complain to a politician, they'll do something about it. And in a former life, I was a senior policy advisor for a politician, for a minister. So, let me tell you, when people come in and complain, you listen up because there's a vote involved. But that point aside, look, history works with a combination of fiscal policy and monetary policy. And they counterbalance each other and you can use them sensibly. What you find and what has happened over the last 30 years is that fiscal policy is nearly dead. And all you hear about, every day is, oh, the Fed doing this, or, Phil Lowe needs to do this and that. Well, you can make interest rates as low as possible. Look at what we've got them to. Have we got a blending boom? No, we haven't got a lending boom. Why? Because everybody's got a bloody bucket load of debt. So you could come to me and say, Steve, 0 interest rates and I want you to borrow. And I say, well, okay, what for? Because, people want stuff. Well, no, they don't. We're in a recession. Why would I build for, when we come out of a recession? It could be a long way away. So my mind is it always comes back to the demand side of the equation, okay? And when you look at MMT's discussion about taxes, that helps regulate the demand side. And again, what you said before is, we're already doing it. Yes, we are. Because what we did was we said, I'll tell you what we'll do. We want people to stop smoking. Okay, how do we do that? I'll tell you what we do. We make cigarette packets $35 a packet. That reduces the demand for them.
So you tax at almost the sector or industry level.
Yes, what you do is, and it's always the people understand that taxes are not raising money for the government to spend, right? Because as I said to you before, they don't need your tax dollars, right? Because they can just say, well, oh, and I'll just give you more money. Oh, well, don't you need me to pay you to give it back to me? No, mate, we've got the machine out the back here. So taxes take on a different role. And what they do is taxes help regulate demand and also a steer where we want investment to go. For example, tax breaks. Again, as I said, you might say, as they do in other countries, in the Scandinavian countries, alcohol is really expensive. Why? Because they don't want people damaging their health with alcohol. Taxes are the vehicle to do that. And so, again, you can see that monetary policy and fiscal policy can work together. What we've had over the last 30 to 40 years is a very heavy reliance on monetary policy. And what it's done is it's led us to a position where, like Japan was in the 90s, the private debt levels were extremely high. And so you can imagine, Owen, if Philip Lowe came out and said, you know what, we're going to raise rates. We're going to, work it back up to 2, 3, 4%. That would crush the economy because everybody's got, not everybody, but a lot of people have got a lot of property debt that they need to service. Now, the more you say to people you've got to repay, the less money there is for them to go and spend their money discretionary. Therefore, that drops the growth rate down. You see, so we're caught in this vicious cycle where we need the government to come in and spend a lot of money. But what we have to do at the same time is, in my opinion, is we have to put some governors on some of the investment lending, because what you find is if things start going well again, people have got this desire to speculate, and so you'll continue to lend too much money and get the same problems over and over again. And indeed, that's what's been happening since about after the war. We've had these cycles of everybody borrowing, then going, oh God, we can't raise interest rates. Why? Because that'll crash the economy. Oh, all right, well, let's just leave them artificially low so nobody goes broke. Well, yeah, but now, nobody can grow again. Oh, I know, but we can't, have all these bankruptcies. And so this is what happened in the GFC. And it's where Australia finds itself a little bit now, where we're saying there's a lot of people with a lot of debt. And if you raise interest rates or you get higher unemployment or those sorts of things, it's going to create a problem. And that will be reflected in, property markets, in stock markets, in a lot of markets.
I heard it put to me, Stephen, that effectively now that everyone knows that the government can print money and it can pay its debt, there's no going back from that. And I think, obviously, I'm not probably the one to give you economics lectures or anything like that. But the way I heard it put to me was effectively, that the critical part here is the budgeting. So how does Treasury function insofar as setting limits on what, is reasonable for spending in certain sectors, and how do you then tax that to control that upper limit? And I feel like if we